The week before Christmas always smelled like pine and old dust. I remember thinking the air itself felt tired, like it had seen too much. People moved faster then, carting Bog's wrapping paper. Barred happiness. Nobody noticed how easily desperation hides behind holiday lights. That winter, Mississippi felt unusually quiet, not peaceful, just careful, as if the state was holding its breath. I didn't know his name yet. I only knew a man would soon believe love was promised to him.
He sat across from me without taking his coat off. That alone told me he didn't plan on staying long. His hands were clean, almost too clean, resting stiffly on his knees. Men who wait for fate never relax their hands. He asked one question: will I be loved by Christmas? The cards didn't scare me. The space between them did. I told him what I always tell people like him. Love comes, but it never comes gently. He smiled like someone hearing good news through a wall. He didn't ask anything else.
He left her shop before the bell finished ringing. Outside, Christmas music leaked from a nearby store. That was the moment everything could still go wrong or right. It chose wrong. He walked past families, couples, hands, brushing hands. Each laugh landed on him like an accusation. Love wasn't coming to him, at least not the way he imagined it. 2 days later, he met the first woman at a small bar off Highway 49. The kind of place where nobody listens carefully. She laughed easily, loudly, without checking who was watching. That laugh stayed with him longer than her name. They drank too much. She drank more. When she touched his arm, it felt accidental. When she pulled away, it felt deliberate. He didn't plan to hurt her. That's the lie he would repeat years later. The blow was sudden, ugly, unromantic. Her head met the corner of a table before the floor. Silence rushed in like water. He stood there waiting for something to fix itself. Nothing did. Christmas lights blinked above the bar window. He didn't run right away. He stood there longer than anyone should. The bartender was in the back room. Music kept playing like nothing had changed. He touched her shoulder once, carefully. Her body answered with weight, not movement. That was when fear arrived. Not loud, but practical. It told him to think, not to feel. He wiped the table first, then his hands. The bar smelled like spilled beer and lemon cleaner. That smell followed him for months. He left money on the counter. Too much money. Outside, the night accepted him without questions. Mississippi nights are good at that. Police called it an accident. People wanted to believe that Dachi had been drinking heavily. Witnesses confirmed it easily. A fall. A bad angle. Her name disappeared from conversations within weeks. His didn't appear at all. He expected guilt to arrive suddenly. Instead, it leaked, and slowly. At grocery stores, at stoplights, he began noticing laughter more than faces, especially women laughing together. Laughter started sounding like judgment, like memory. 2 years passed without anything dramatic. That's important. No blood. No headlines. Just a man aging slightly faster inside. Just a man learning silence. He tried dating again. Briefly. Each rejection felt rehearsed, as if everyone had agreed on something without him. He told himself he wanted connection. What he wanted was correction. Someone to look at him differently. Someone to stop laughing. When that didn't happen, something settled. Not anger. Decision. The second woman worked at a pharmacy near Jackson. She spoke carefully, like words cost money. He liked that at first. It felt respectful. They went on 3 dates, enough time for expectations to form. She never laughed at his jokes. She barely smiled. He interpreted that as distance. Distance felt like disrespect. He began correcting her. Small things. How she spoke, how she listened. The night she tried to leave early, he blocked the door. Not violently, firmly. This time, he planned, not murder. control. He used pills he had saved, just in case. He would later call it concern. She never woke up, not fully. When it was over, he sat beside her. For a long time. After that, something broke open, or closed. He stopped seeing women as individuals. They became moments, reactions, reflections. He didn't feel powerful. He felt aligned. The second disappearance didn't look like a crime at first. Adults are allowed to vanish quietly. Her co-workers assumed she moved. Someone said Texas. Police wrote it down as no immediate danger. That phrase closes many doors. He watched the news carefully, not nervously, patiently. He kept small things from her. Nothing dramatic. A scarf, a receipt. Objects felt safer than memories. They didn't argue back. He told himself he missed her. That part was true. He also told himself she needed correction. That part mattered more. By then, he had learned something important. Silence protects those who don't explain themselves. He stopped talking about feelings. He started observing reactions. He adjusted his posture, his tone. He practiced being agreeable. Women relax around men who disappear slightly. The third woman met him online, a Christmas-themed profile picture. She smiled with her eyes, not her mouth. They talked for weeks before meeting. Long enough to create a version of him. He followed that version carefully, like ice creeped.
He wasn't strange at first. That's what scared me later. He listened too well, like he was memorizing me. When I joked, he waited before laughing, as if checking something inside. I told myself I was overthinking. Women do that when they want things to work.
Their first date ended without incident. That disappointed him. The second date felt closer. That worried her. By the third date, he invited her to his place. She hesitated. He noticed. He always noticed.
His apartment was clean. Too clean. No photos on the walls, only Surfazis. I asked him about his family. He answered, like he'd practiced. When he went to the kitchen, I stood up. I don't know why.
She noticed the pill bottle first, unlabeled. Then the photographs, face down on a side table. She didn't mean to look. She always meant to look.
I flipped one photo over. Just one. The girl was smiling. I'd seen that smile before. It was on a missing person flyer at a bus stop. That's when my body reacted before my mind. I grabbed my phone.
He returned holding water and pills, concern shaped like kindness. She lied badly. He noticed. She said she felt sick. He smiled. The police arrived faster than he expected. That surprised him. He left through the back stairwell, calmly. Mississippi highways don't ask questions at night. They just stretch. By morning, his car was found near the state line. He wasn't far. Inside his apartment, police found order, not chaos. Photographs, personal items, medication, carefully stored, enough evidence to stop pretending, enough to listen. They arrested him just after sunrise at a gas station near the Mississippi border. He didn't resist. He asked if he could finish his coffee. The officer said no. He nodded, like that was fair. In the interrogation room, he sat straight, hands folded, no shaking, no tears. He looked relieved. That detail stayed in the report.
I didn't hate them. That's the part people get wrong. I wanted them to stop looking past me, to stay. When they laughed, it felt like leaving. I just wanted them to stay.
He spoke slowly, choosing words like tools, not weapons. He didn't deny anything. He reframed it. Accidents became misunderstandings. Control became care.
The first one fell. That happens. The second needed rest. She was tired all the time. I stayed with them. That has to count for something.
Detectives let him talk. Silence makes people honest. He described their routines better than their families could. That detail mattered. He remembered what they wore, what they said last.
I missed them after. I still do. People think monsters forget. We don't. We repeat.
When asked about the third woman, his tone changed. Only slightly disappointment replaced affection. That shift was documented.
She noticed too much that ruined Italiano. I could tell she already decided who I was. I hate that moment. Once they decide, you disappear. I didn't want to disappear again.
Psychologists would later write pages about that sentence. They wouldn't improve it. He didn't see women as enemies. He saw them as mirrors. Mirrors that sometimes laughed. Mirrors that sometimes turned away. Evidence filled the table slowly. Photos, receipts, medication records. He watched calmly, as if reviewing a life he recognized.
I never wanted fear. I wanted quiet. Fear is loud. Love is supposed to be quiet. That's what she said. The first one.
That line didn't appear in any statement before. No one knew if it was true. But it didn't matter. Truth wasn't the point anymore. Charges were filed under Mississippi law. Multiple counts. The language was firm, unemotional. Life sentences don't need adjectives. They just end conversations. The third woman testified weeks later. Her voice never broke. She spoke about instincts. How about pauses? About the feeling of being evaluated instead of seen. The jury listened.
I don't think he wanted to kill me. That's worse. I think he wanted me to stop being myself, to fit. When I didn't, he looked empty. Like something failed.
The verdict came quickly. No surprise. He showed no reaction. He had already adjusted. As they led him away, he asked one last question. Quietly.
Do they still laugh about me?
The story didn't end with the verdict. Stories like this never do. People like clean endings. Courtrooms provide the illusion. Newspapers printed his photo once, then stopped. Mississippi moved on quickly, it always does. The apartment was emptied within a month. Landlords don't like reminders. Walls were repainted, carpets replaced. Nothing was left behind officially. Unofficially, the air stayed wrong. Neighbors said the silence felt different, thicker. The third woman moved out of state, no interviews. She changed her phone number. Her routines. She didn't call herself a survivor. She hated that word. What survived was the feeling that never left.
I still notice pauses. When someone waits too long to respond, I still track exits. Even at dinner parties, people say time heals. It doesn't. It just teaches you how to live injured, quietly.
Psychological reports described him in neutral language. Detached, fixated, emotionally arrested. None of the words explained why laughter mattered so much. None ever do. In prison, he followed rules carefully. Model behavior. He didn't fight. Didn't argue. Guards said he thanked them too often. That detail made them uncomfortable.
They're quieter here. No laughing, everyone watches themselves. I like that. It feels fair, no surprises.
He wrote letters he never sent. Pages of careful handwriting. None of them apologized. They explained. Love appeared often in those letters. So did disappointment. Years later, a journalist tried to revisit the case. Holiday season, the editor wanted a hook. Something eerie. That's when the fortune teller resurfaced. As e adete.
People came back asking about him, as if I kept pieces. I didn't. I never do. I remember faces, not futures. His face stayed. Not because of what I saw, because of what he wanted me to confirm.
She said she remembered his question clearly, not the answer. People think prophecy is power. It isn't. It's permission.
He wanted certainty, That's always dangerous. Love promised becomes love demanded. That's the shift. I saw disappointment waiting for him. That's all.
The article never ran. Too quiet. Too psychological. Not enough spectacle. But the timing mattered. Christmas was coming again. In his cell, he marked the days carefully. Ritual matters to people like him. When December arrived, he grew restless. Guards noticed. He asked fewer questions, spoke less.
She said it would come by Christmas. She didn't lie. Love did come and just not to me. It came for everyone else. That still counts.
On Christmas morning, Mississippi woke quietly. No headlines. Families opened gifts. Bars filled later. Somewhere, a woman laughed without knowing why she hesitated first. Somewhere else, a man listened to silence. Stories like this don't warn you. They observe. They don't shout. They wait. And sometimes, they only ask one question. The same one he asked, "Will I be loved?" That question didn't belong only to him. That's why it lingered. People repeated it silently every December. They just used different words. Mississippi kept moving. Roads stayed the same. The places he visited didn't change. They absorbed. The bar where it started reopened under new management. Fresh paint, new stools, same corners. No plaque marked what happened. Accidents, rarely on memorials. People drank there again. They laughed. Laughter returned to the room. Isli, eat, always doys. Investigators revisited the first death quietly. Routine. Paperwork surfaced. Dates aligned. They didn't reopen the case. They didn't need to. Truth had already moved on. That's how it works. In interviews, detectives avoided emotional language. They focused on patterns. Isolation. Fixation. Control disguised as care. The usual vocabulary. None of it explained to patients that bothered them. He had waited years between acts. That wasn't impulsive. That was rehearsal. Adjustment. He learned what silence allowed, what it forgave. In prison therapy sessions, he rarely spoke first. He listened. Other inmates filled the space. He studied them. Therapists noted his interest in reactions, especially ridicule laughter again. Always laughter.
People think jokes are harmless. They're not. Jokes decide who matters, who gets reduced. When someone laughs at you, they shrink you. I couldn't shrink anymore.
That sentence never made it into a report. It felt too personal, too revealing. Too honest. Honesty scares institutions. They prefer Meanwhile, families of the women tried to rebuild narratives. They chose kinder versions. Accidents. Bad timing. They avoided his name. Names give shape. Grief stays easier when it's shapeless, less sharp. The third woman never returned to Mississippi, but Mississippi followed her. In news clips, in holiday lights, in the way strangers smiled too long, too carefully.
I don't think about him every day. That's important. I think about moments. Pauses, the space before someone answers. That's where danger lives. I trust that space now. I didn't before.
Her testimony became training material. Workshops. PowerPoint slides. Bullet points. They reduced her fear into lessons. That's how systems learn. The fortune teller closed her shop a year later. No announcement. She said business felt different. Heavier. People didn't want futures anymore. They wanted reassurance.
After him, they stopped asking what would happen. They asked if something bad would. That's not fortune telling, that's fear management. I wasn't good at that. I never lied.
She moved north, left Mississippi behind. Some stories don't follow you. they wait. In prison, Christmas decorations appeared every year. Paper snowflakes, cheap lights, mandatory cheer. He watched them carefully. He always watched.
They decorate like happiness can be scheduled. It can't, but disappointment can. That's easier. I mark December differently now. I count quiet days.
Guards reported he became more withdrawn each winter. Not violent, contained, compressed, as if something folded inward. Slowly. Before the first woman, there was nothing remarkable. That was the problem. No childhood headlines. No obvious cruelty. Teachers remembered him as quiet, polite. The kind of boy adults forget to worry about. Those are the dangerous ones. He grew up learning how to be unnoticed. That takes practice. He learned when to speak, when not to. Laughter followed him even then. Not mocking, dismissive. That's worse. Teenage years passed without rebellion. No fights, no trouble, no release. He watched couples form and dissolve, always from the outside. Rejection never arrived loudly. It arrived through absence. Psychologists later called it emotional starvation. That word sounds clinical. Hunger is a better one. Hunger waits. It doesn't scream. It studies. By adulthood, he had learned something critical. Women laughed differently around men they trusted. Freely, without monitoring reactions. That laughter became a test. One he always failed.
I wasn't angry at first. I was embarrassed. Embarrassment sits deeper. It rots. Anger moves. Embarrassment stays.
That distinction never left him. It shaped everything. The first woman embarrassed him publicly, unintentionally. Her laughter wasn't cruel. That didn't matter. Meaning doesn't require intent, only impact. After the first death, something rewired, not snapped. He learned the world. Didn't correct him? Eat. Adjusted. Silence followed. Silence rewarded. The second woman represented a solution. Control without chaos. No witnesses, no laughter. Just compliance. Just quiet. He mistook submission for intimacy. That's common. But control decays eat always dos. The third woman survived because she noticed the decay early. That's the difference. She didn't see danger. She saw contradiction.
He mirrored me, too, perfectly. Nobody does that naturally. People interrupt, they disagree. He didn't. That felt wrong. I realized I wasn't being heard. I was being collected.
That insight saved her. Not bravery, pattern recognition. Experience. Danger doesn't always feel violent. Sometimes it feels curated. In interviews, experts emphasize to that point. Predators adapt. They don't rush. They refine. The most dangerous ones wait for permission. Social permission. Mississippi law focused on acts, not intentions. That simplified things. Eat. Always. Dois. Sentences were served. Files were closed, but intention lingered, unpunished. In prison, he began dreaming differently, not about the women, about rooms. Quiet rooms. Rooms where nobody laughed. Nobody judged. That was his idea of peace. That mattered.
I don't miss the acts. I miss the stillness, the moment after they stopped resisting, before they disappeared. That was honest. Nothing else ever was.
That statement disturbed even experienced clinicians, not because it was violent, because it was sincere. Sincerity without empathy is terrifying. Outside, the world kept rehearsing joy. Holiday ads, engagement photos, public laughter. The contrast mattered, it always did. Once the case entered public memory, it changed shape. Details soft. People prefer patterns over people. They make fear manageable. Online forums named him things, none of them accurate. Monsters are easier when they feel unreal. He wasn't. Podcasts summarized his life in 40 minutes. That should worry you. They focused on dates and methods. They skipped silences. Silence doesn't sell ads. It doesn't comfort. The women became archetypes. The drunk one, the quiet one, the smart one who escaped. Names faded. Functions remained. That reduction felt like a second disappearance. Quieter. Law enforcement seminars used his case as a warning. Slides highlighted missed signals. Isolation. Fixation. But they never addressed the hardest part, how normal he looked. Normal is dangerous, because it invites trust. Trust lowers volume. When danger whispers, people lean closer. That's human. In prison, he received fan mail that surprised investigators. Mostly women. Mostly sympathetic. They wrote about loneliness, about being misunderstood. He never replied, not once. Being observed was enough. He didn't need conversation.
They think they know me. They don't. They know themselves. That's why they write. I read quietly. Primera Olwa is dead.
That dynamic worried psychologists. Validation without proximity. Affection without risk. Safe fascination. It mirrored his original desire to closely dot materid. The third woman refused all invitations to speak publicly. She gave one statement. Short. Controlled. She asked journalists to stop calling her brave. They didn't listen.
Bravery implies choice. I reacted. I noticed something wrong and acted on it. That's not heroism. That's survival training women get quietly from experience.
Her words circulated briefly, then disappeared. They lacked drama. They lacked closure. People want fear with a lesson, not with responsibility. Meanwhile, he aged in small increments. Gray at the temples, softer posture, same eyes. Time didn't correct him. It stabilized him. Therapists noted he stopped talking about women. He spoke about atmosphere, noise levels, room dynamics. He missed environments, not people. That distinction mattered.
I don't think about faces anymore. I think about rooms. Rooms before something changes. That moment, you can feel it. If you're paying attention.
That sentence ended his sessions. They transferred him. Some professionals prefer distance. Understanding too much is dangerous. Outside, Christmas ads returned every year. Smiling couples, laughing women. Promises. The cycle continued uninterrupted. Eat. Always dos. And somewhere, in someone else's life, a pause stretched a second too long. After the case faded, similar stories surfaced quietly. Different towns, same pauses. Nothing dramatic connected them. Just discomfort people ignored. A woman left a date early in Biloxi. She couldn't explain why. Another blocked a number in Hattiesburg. The voice felt rehearsed. No crimes followed those decisions. That's the point. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it tests boundaries softly. It waits for politeness to override instinct. It relies on hesitation. Workshops started using a new phrase, respect the pause. It sounded harmless, almost gentle, but it saved people. Quietly. The third woman heard about that phrase years later. She recognized it immediately. She didn't feel proud. She felt tired.
I don't want my instincts to become curriculum. That's depressing. But if it helped someone leave earlier, then it mattered.
Meanwhile, he followed these changes from afar, through filtered access. Prison televisions show patterns without context. That suited him. He noticed fewer stories about men like him. That pleased him. Not because it erased him, because it normalized silence.
They're learning to leave earlier. That's good. It means fewer mistakes, fewer disappointments. People think prevention is kindness. It's correction.
That note was flagged, reviewed. He was asked to clarify. He declined. Refusal was his last form of control, small, but intact. Years stacked quietly after that. He aged into invisibility. New cases replaced old ones. Attention shifted, but patterns don't disappear. They wait. The fortune teller heard about similar stories occasionally. She never commented publicly. Privately, she stopped reading cards. She read people.
Futures are noisy. People are precise. They tell you what they want immediately. You just have to listen. He wanted permission. That's all.
That realization arrived too late to matter, but early enough to repeat. Because stories don't warn loudly, they echo. His final years passed without incident. That unsettled people who studied him. No outbursts. No confessions. He followed routines carefully. Routine had always calmed him. Medical notes described him as compliant, low risk. He aged like a man who had already arrived somewhere. That detail mattered. He didn't talk about regret. He talked about order.
Regret implies error. I don't see one. Things happened as they were allowed to happen. That's honesty. If anything, I waited too long. Tate se all.
That sentence closed his file permanently. No further evaluations were scheduled. Some minds don't open. They stabilize. He died quietly in his sleep. Winter. No witnesses. No audience. The prison noted the time and date. Nothing else. There were no funerals. No statements. His name appeared once in a local paper. Tenbanese silence accepted him fully. At last, the families learned through official channels, short calls, neutral language. Condolences offered carefully. Closure arrived unevenly. As it always does, the third woman found out months later. By accident. She read the headline twice, then closed the tab. No relief followed, just space.
I didn't feel safe because he died. That's important. I felt older, like something finally ended. Some threats don't leave when people do. They change shape.
The fortune teller heard the news indirectly from a former client. She didn't ask questions. She already knew the shape of the ending.
People think death finishes stories. It doesn't. It just stops adding new scenes. The rest keeps playing.
That Christmas, Mississippi felt ordinary again. Lights, music, crowds. Laughter moved freely through stores and bars. Unaware. Somewhere a woman paused before laughing, then laughed anyway. Somewhere else, a man noticed that pause and learned nothing. The story doesn't ask you to be afraid. It asks you to notice, not monsters. Moments. Because the most dangerous promises are the ones people want to hear. Christmas returned the way it always does, quietly reshaping familiar streets. Lights covered buildings that remembered more than they showed. Mississippi looked calm from the outside, rehearsed and polite. Inside, it carried layers of unfinished moments. The bar was full again, louder than before. Nobody mentioned why one corner always felt colder. Laughter bounced off the walls without resistance. It sounded harmless to everyone who hadn't learned to listen. The women he met were never warned by stories like this. They were taught to be kind, patient, and understanding. Politeness filled the gaps where instinct tried to speak. That silence mattered more than words. He wasn't born a monster, and that truth made people uncomfortable. Monsters are easier when they feel separate. He was shaped slowly by what went unanswered, by what was laughed away. The fortune teller never claimed she saw the future. She only noticed patterns others ignored. What frightened her wasn't violence, but expectation. Expectation always wants payment. She closed her shop without ceremony. Some knowledge doesn't belong on display.
People come asking when love will arrive. They never ask what it will cost. When someone needs certainty, they are already in danger.
The third woman lived a quiet life afterward. She trusted pauses more than promises. She never tried to explain her survival as strength. She called it attention. Attention kept her alive when kindness would not have. That distinction stayed with her.
I didn't escape because I was brave. I escaped because something felt wrong and I didn't argue with myself. That feeling saved me before logic arrived.
Pressure didn't arrive suddenly. It accumulated through small humiliations, disguised as jokes. Women laughed because laughter was expected. He heard it as judgment. Every December, the same pattern returned. Rejection dressed as coincidence. The city celebrated connection, while he studied exclusion. That contrast became personal. The middle of the story is always the most dangerous part. That's where justification learns to speak. He told himself he only wanted to be understood. Understanding slowly changed its meaning. Desire turned into entitlement without announcement. Entitlement demands correction. He began rehearsing conversations that never happened. In those rehearsals, ale was lost. Christmas Eve pressed harder than other nights. Silence outside felt intentional. Snow erased footsteps too quickly. Mistakes felt easier to imagine. He walked streets glowing with decorations meant for others. Each light confirmed he was invisible. That invisibility didn't hurt anymore. It instructed. The women sensed tension but named it politeness. Politeness has buried more warnings than violence ever could. Nobody wants to ruin a holiday mood. That rule saved no one. He learned when people ignored discomfort, that's when they are most vulnerable. Christmas gave him timing. Timing gave him courage. This is where stories usually speed up. This one refuses. Because the danger wasn't in action. It was in preparation. Every thought was rehearsed until it felt deserved. Every hesitation was labeled weakness. He waited for permission that would never arrive. Waiting turned into planning. If you've listened to this story up to this point, it means it's resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel and like it to keep these stories alive and coming out. Your support helps this story continue to exist. It's more important than you think. By the second week of December, the town had fully surrendered to Christmas. Strings of lights wrapped, even the most abandoned buildings, pretending nothing bad could happen under them. People trusted the season too much. That trust made them careless. He watched couples through cafe windows, their hands touching automatically. Like habit was love. What hurt wasn't loneliness. What hurt was how effortless it looked for everyone else. The first woman didn't feel like a mistake at the beginning. She felt like proof that something could finally change. Alcohol softened her words, but sharpened her laughter. She laughed when she was nervous. He misunderstood that laughter. He would misunderstand many things after that. They met during a Christmas party where everyone drank too much and listened too closely to music they didn't even like. The argument wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, sudden, and stupid. The kind of moment nobody imagines becoming permanent. He told himself it was an accident, because accidents are easier to survive than responsibility. Christmas lights blinked in the next room while he stood completely still. He waited for her to breathe again. She didn't. That night rewired him. Fear didn't destroy him. It organized him. 2 years passed without punishment. That absence felt like permission. He learned that silence could be mistaken for forgiveness. The second woman was different. She didn't drink. She didn't laugh easily. She asked questions he didn't rehearse answers for. She challenged him without raising her voice. That felt like disrespect. Respect to him meant agreement. When she said she didn't feel safe, he heard accusation. Accusation demanded correction. This time he planned. Planning made it feel cleaner. The sleeping pills were prescribed once for anxiety. He kept the bottle long after the anxiety changed its shape. She trusted the glass of water because trust was easier than suspicion. He told police later that he missed her. Missing someone doesn't mean wishing them alive. The third woman arrived when Christmas returned again. December always brought his hunger back. She noticed things early. The way he avoided mirrors, the way his smile appeared too late. Instinct whispered before logic found words. During their date, he left the room to get medication he said he needed. The apartment exhaled when he was gone.
I didn't plan to look around. I just didn't want to sit still. That's when I saw the photograph turn face down on the table. I recognized her smile before I remembered where from. She was missing. I was sure of it.
When he returned, something in her eyes had changed. Fear doesn't hide well when it knows it's right. She made an excuse. She left without running. Run-in would have confirmed everything too soon. Police arrived while Christmas music played from a neighbor's apartment. He wasn't there anymore. They found photographs, clothes, medication. Evidence waits patiently. He was stopped near the Mississippi state line. Christmas lights reflected in the patrol car window like watching eyes.
I love them in my own way. They who's didn't understand how serious love can be.
The detectives noticed how often he mentioned respect. Respect appeared in every explanation, every excuse. To him, respect meant staying, listening, and never laughing at the wrong moment. Anything else felt like betrayal. They asked about the sleeping pills found in the kitchen drawer. He corrected them, calling it a cabinet. Details mattered to him more than consequences. Precision gave him comfort. He described love as something fragile that needed control. Control, he said, was misunderstood by weak people. The room felt colder as he spoke longer. Even trained listeners shifted in their chairs. At one point he asked if Christmas decorations were allowed in prison. The question landed wrong. He said holidays were dangerous for lonely people. Loneliness, he insisted, made accidents happen. Hours passed without raised voices. Calm became the most disturbing element in the room. When the interview ended, he thanked everyone for listening. Gratitude sounded rehearsed. Evidence didn't argue back. Evidence waited across town. The surviving woman sat awake, staring at her phone. Sleep avoided her completely. She replayed small moments she almost ignored. The delayed smile, the way he corrected her words. News reports repeated his face beside the word suspect. Seeing him labeled didn't bring relief. Christmas Eve arrived anyway. It always does. Snow fell lightly, covering sidewalks without asking permission. Covering things had always been his instinct too. In Mississippi, laws don't care about intentions. They care about patterns. Prosecutors built the story slowly, brick by brick. Each photograph removed another excuse. During trial preparations, he requested to read the statements himself. He wanted to hear how he sounded to others. What unsettled everyone most was his consistency. His version never changed. He said he missed them during December nights. Missing, to him, felt like proof of love. When asked if he felt remorse, he corrected the question. He said remorse suggested mistake. Christmas morning arrived with quiet headlines and muted joy. Some families celebrated unaware of the courtroom lights warming up. He listened as dates and names were read aloud. Names sounded heavier when spoken publicly. The surviving woman chose not to attend. Survival sometimes means distance. Sentencing came without drama. Finality rarely announces itself loudly. As he was led away, he asked one last question. He wanted to know if it was still snowing. Outside, Christmas lights flickered against gray clouds. Promises remained, but nothing else was taken. The trial did not become a spectacle, and that disappointed some people. Evil without theatrics feels harder to understand. Reporters waited for breakdowns that never came. He gave them nothing dramatic to remember. The judge spoke about patterns, escalation, and foreseeable harm. Words fell like measured snow. Christmas decorations were visible through the courthouse doors. Red boughs framed a very ordinary ending. He listened without moving, absorbing the sentence like weather. Years sounded abstract to him. When the gavel struck, something finally shifted in his expression. Not fear, but irritation. He disliked conclusions he did not control. Control had always been the point. The courtroom emptied quickly after the verdict. Closure is rarely social. Outside, families posed for holiday photos. Near a plastic tree, justice shared space with celebration. The surviving woman watched the news later that night. Sound stayed low. Lights stayed off. She paused the screen when his face appeared. Distance felt safer than understanding. Her hands still shook when she thought about the photograph. Recognition had saved her life. She remembered how calm he sounded when asking for water. Calm had been the warning. Therapists would later call it intuition. She called it luck. Sleep returned slowly over the following weeks. Dreams negotiated their way back. She avoided Christmas music for a long time. Some sounds don't deserve forgiveness. Across the state, detectives boxed evidence for storage. Case numbers replaced names. They spoke about the investigation with clinical distance. Distance keeps professionals functional. One officer admitted the photos bothered him most. Smiles freeze badly in print. Another said the pills were what stayed with him. Small objects cause large endings. Paperwork continued long after headlines stopped. Closure takes longer behind desks. In a quieter part of town, the woman who once read fortunes closed her shop early. She had seen him only once, years ago. Some faces leave residue. She remembered warning him without specifics. Specifics invite arguments. After his arrest, people asked if she had known. Knowing and seeing are different skills. She removed the Christmas candles from her window. Fire felt inappropriate that year. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the prison addressed to no one specific. It contained no apology, only explanation. Explanation was his favorite currency. The warden noted his behavior as compliant and polite. Politeness can coexist with danger. He asked for extra books during December. Stories comforted him. On Christmas Eve, snow finally reached the prison yard. He watched it silently. Somewhere far away, the surviving woman locked her door and exhaled. For the first time, December passed without promise and without threat. Time moved differently after the verdict. Days no longer leaned toward anticipation. Winter stretched quietly, draining color from everything familiar. Mississippi felt flatter under gray skies. People stopped mentioning his name out loud. Names lose power when repetition ends. Court documents replaced headlines. Paperwork finished what fear started. The house where he lived stayed empty through January. Realtors avoided it politely. Neighbors pretended they forgot the address. Memory often chooses convenience. Inside, dust settled where routines once lived. Nothing moved unless disturbed. Police returned once more to finalize inventory. Even empty spaces require confirmation. They opened drawers already cataloged. Familiar evidence still felt wrong. One officer paused at the nightstand, a faint rectangle marked where a photograph used to be. He imagined hands placing it face down carefully. Care had always been selective. The surviving woman changed cities in early spring. Geography offered breathing room. She told no one why she left so quickly. Explanations invite follow-up questions. New streets felt anonymous and forgiving. No one expected her to remember anything. She started answering calls again. Silence loosened its grip slowly. Sometimes, she still noticed men correcting waiters too sharply. Her body reacted before her thoughts. Therapy taught her to trust those reactions. Instinct had earned its voice. In interviews years later, detectives described the case clinically. Emotion fades in retelling. They spoke about escalation and missed warnings. Patterns always appear clearer afterward. One detective admitted that calmness unsettled him most. Rage would have been easier. Another said December cases were always worse. Holidays magnify whatever already exists. The fortune teller never reopened her shop. She moved south without announcement. She said some warnings echoed too long. Silence became her new profession. In prison, he settled into routine without resistance. Routine replaced anticipation. He attended therapy sessions without objection. Participation looked good on reports. When asked about empathy, he spoke academically. Feelings became concepts. He marked time by holidays rather than dates. December still stood apart. Each Christmas, decorations appeared briefly in common areas. He avoided them deliberately. Avoidance felt like control. Control still mattered. Other inmates avoided him instinctively. Calm isolates quickly in closed spaces. Letters arrive less frequently as years passed. Explanations lose audiences. One December, none arrived at all. That silence felt different. He stared at the small window during snowfall. Snow hides nothing permanently. Somewhere else, a woman slept through Christmas night peacefully. No promises were made. Nothing waited to be taken. Years later, the case resurfaced quietly through a podcast episode. A calm voice retold it without embellishment. Listeners leaned closer during the December segments. Seasonal stories always land deeper. The host described him as ordinary, and that word caused discomfort. Ordinary feels too close. Comments filled with theories, diagnoses, and misplaced certainty. Distance gives people confidence. The surviving woman never listened past the introduction. Some stories don't need revisiting. She had built a life structured around calm predictability. Predictability felt like safety earned. She decorated modestly during holidays, enough lights to acknowledge the season, never more. In Mississippi, the house was finally demolished. Erasing places feels like progress. Construction crews worked without knowing details. Ignorance makes labor lighter. The ground looked no different afterward. Earth doesn't remember intent. In prison, he aged quietly. Age stripped urgency, but not belief. He still framed his memories as relationships. Language protected him from reality. Psych evaluations labeled him compliant, but detached. Detachment often avoids punishment. One doctor wrote that he feared humiliation more than isolation. Shame had always driven him. Every December, that fear sharpened slightly. Memory reacts to calendars. He once told a chaplain that Christmas promises too much. Promises create expectations. Expectation leads to disappointment. Disappointment seeks explanation. The chaplain never responded. Silence felt appropriate. Outside those walls, winters continued passing unnoticed. New crimes replaced old conversations. People moved on without ceremony. Moving on rarely asks permission. The surviving woman eventually laughed again, cautiously. Laughter returned without apology. She trusted it when it came naturally. Forced joy had never helped. On one quiet Christmas Eve, snow fell unexpectedly. She watched without thinking of him. That absence felt like victory. Victory doesn't always announce itself. Some stories end loudly. Others dissolve into normal life. This one ended with quiet rooms and unreturned glances, with promises no longer believed, and with the understanding that evil rarely arrives screaming. It usually knocks politely during the holidays. The podcast episode faded from trending lists within weeks. Attention always seeks something newer and louder. What remained were quiet downloads, late-night listeners, and long pauses after certain sentences. People wrote messages saying the story felt familiar. Familiarity frightened them more than details. Some remembered moments they once dismissed, a laugh that lasted too long, a correction delivered too sharply. December returned again, as it always does. Decorations arrived without context or memory. Stores played the same songs every year. Repetition creates false comfort. In prison, he marked another Christmas on a wall calendar. Lines replaced anticipation. He no longer asked questions about snow. Weather lost its symbolism. Therapy sessions became shorter. There was nothing new to explain. When asked if he still dreamed about them, he answered honestly. Dreams had stopped visiting. Without dreams, memory became flatter. Flat memories are easier to live with. Outside, the surviving woman hosted a small dinner. Only a few people, all trusted. Candles stayed unlit. Light came from the kitchen instead. She noticed how easily conversation flowed now. Ease felt unfamiliar but welcome. At one point, someone laughed loudly. Her body tensed, then relaxed. That reaction passed without ceremony. Helene rarely asks for applause. In another part of the country, someone listened to the podcast while driving at night. They turned the volume down near the end. Silence felt necessary. Stories like this don't ask to be remembered. They wait. They resurface in instincts, pauses, and moments of hesitation. They live where warnings once stood. Christmas night ended quietly across the state. No headlines followed. Snow melted by morning. Streets returned to normal. Nothing dramatic marked the passage of time. That was the point. Some evils end in courtrooms. Others dissolve into routines. This one ended without spectacle, without redemption, without mystery. Just a pattern completed, and a season that learned nothing, but promised everything again. If this story held your attention, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories stay alive and reach those who listen late at night. If you want more stories like this, based on real fears and real patterns, leave a like. It tells us to keep going, even when the stories are quiet. After the episode ended, nothing officially followed. No updates, no twists, no forgotten evidence. That absence frustrated some listeners. They wanted a secret ending, but real stories rarely offer hidden doors. They simply stop. Months passed without reference to the case. Search results sank lower each week. The surviving woman stopped checking entirely. Curiosity had lost its grip. She learned that peace often arrives disguised as boredom. Her life filled with routines that required no explanation. Work, groceries, quiet evenings. December approached again, slower this time. Anticipation felt muted, manageable. She allowed herself a small tree. No ornaments, just lights. The glow felt neutral. That neutrality mattered. In prison, he requested no special accommodations for the holidays. Requests create attention. He preferred to blend into schedules and counts. Invisibility felt safer than control now. Guards described him as forgettable. Forgettable is its own punishment. Years earlier, that would have terrified him. Now, it simply existed. One guard noticed he never watched holiday programming. Avoidance had become instinct. During intake reviews, psychologists noted emotional flattening. Flattening reduces conflict. He no longer framed memories as love. Language had finally adjusted. What remained was justification without audience. Justification fades quickly alone. Outside, Mississippi winters grew shorter. Snow became unreliable. Climate changed. People adapted. Stories aged. The house's address disappeared from maps. New construction took its place. Families moved in unaware. Awareness isn't transferable through walls. Children played where silence once organized itself. Life reclaimed space without commentary. One night, years later, the surviving woman heard laughter outside her window. She listened carefully, then returned to her book. No tension followed. That mattered most. Somewhere, far away, he marked another year without ceremony. No letters arrived. No questions followed. Time did what no sentence could. It reduced everything to memory, and memory, eventually, learned to let go. Years passed, quietly enough to feel unreal. Silence became the dominant detail of the story. The case existed only in archives and occasional late-night searches. Curiosity survives longer than fear. People who found it years later felt strangely disconnected. Distance stripped the story of urgency. They ask how no one noticed earlier. They always ask that. Patterns are obvious only after they finish forming. While they grow, they look like coincidence. December continued arriving without apology to always doors, store windows filled with artificial snow and perfect families. Perfection remained a convincing lie. In prison, his hair thinned and his posture softened. Time dismantled urgency without mercy. He stopped correcting people during conversations. Correction no longer served a purpose. When asked about regret during a routine evaluation, he paused longer than usual. He said regret implied choice. He preferred inevitability. The evaluator wrote that down carefully. Language still mattered in records. Outside, the surviving woman no longer associated December with danger. Association fades with repetition. She traveled during holidays sometimes. New places diluted old meanings. In unfamiliar cities, Christmas felt like weather. Present, but not personal. She noticed how easily strangers trusted seasonal kindness. That trust still felt fragile. Once, while waiting in an airport, she overheard a podcast discussing old crimes. She recognized the cadence immediately. Recognition didn't hurt anymore. She boarded her flight without listening further. Choice felt powerful. Back in Mississippi, winters shortened again. Snow became a rumor. People forgot why certain years felt heavier. Weight disperses over time. The prison marked another holiday schedule. Meals changed slightly. He ate without comment. Taste had become irrelevant. No dreams returned. Sleep stayed empty. Empty felt safer than memory. Eventually, even professionals stopped mentioning the case. New patterns demanded attention. This story did not warn loudly. It never needed to. It lived in pauses, corrections, and laughter that felt slightly off. It lived in December, and December kept coming, unchanged. Eventually, the story stopped belonging to anyone specific. Ownership dissolved into time. Files yellowed slightly at the edges. Ink faded where hands once trembled. Archivists labeled it resolved. Resolved rarely means understood. The surviving woman stopped being described as such. She became simply a woman again. That transition mattered more than any headline. She built traditions that avoided excess. Small dinners, early nights, familiar faces. Christmas became quieter, less symbolic. Symbols lose power when ignored. She noticed how often people confuse kindness with safety. Kindness is not a shield. That awareness stayed with her. It didn't frighten her anymore. In prison, he was transferred once due to overcrowding. New walls, same silence. No one there knew his story. Introductions were unnecessary. He blended into routines without resistance. Resistance requires belief. During one December intake, a new counselor asked about triggers. He answered honestly. Laughter, he said. When it felt misplaced, the counselor wrote it down without reaction. Neutrality felt unfamiliar. He was not offended. Offense requires expectation. Outside, another generation discovered true crime through algorithms. Stories queued automatically, stripped of weight by convenience. This one appeared occasionally, recommended quietly. Those who listened felt unsettled without knowing why. There was no chase scene, no final revelation, just a steady erosion of normal moments. December lights flickered on streets that no longer remembered him. Children counted days until Christmas without fear. That was the closest thing to justice. This story offered not punishment, not closure, just continuity. Evil did not repeat itself here. It simply aged out of relevance. And that, more than anything else, felt unsettling. Years later, people struggled to remember exact details. Memory blurred edges first, then intentions. They remembered December more than names. Season's anchor, fear better than facts. The case existed now as atmosphere rather than narrative, a feeling without a timeline. True crime forums debated whether he had been misunderstood. Distance breeds dangerous sympathy. Others shut those conversations down quickly. Some patterns don't deserve reinterpretation. The surviving woman never joined those discussions. Survival had taught her when silence mattered. She recognized how stories mutate once they outlive witnesses. At work, younger colleagues talked about holiday stress. She listened without correcting them. Everyone carries different Decembers. She noticed how laughter no longer startled her. Startle reflex fades when safety proves consistent. That change felt subtle, but permanent. In prison, his health declined without drama. Medical notes replaced psychological ones. Doctors spoke to him gently, impersonally. He appreciated the efficiency. He no longer spoke about love during evaluations. The word felt impractical now. When asked if he feared dying alone, he answered truthfully. Fear had moved on. He feared being remembered incorrectly. Records would decide that, for him. Outside, Mississippi towns expanded and contracted. Stores changed names. Streets changed numbers. The season stayed the same. Lights went up earlier each year. Darkness arrived sooner. People adjusted without thinking why. One December, a short article resurfaced online. No commentary, just facts. It didn't go viral. That felt appropriate. The surviving woman scrolled past it without stopping. She noticed the reflection in the screen instead. It looked ordinary, That was enough. Time closed the remaining gaps without ceremony. No final lesson emerged. No warning was issued officially. The story ended not with understanding, but with forgetting. And forgetting, in this case, was mercy. For most people, forgetting felt natural. For a few, it felt earned. Time softened the sharpest edges, leaving only vague discomfort behind. Discomfort is easier to live with than fear. The story became something parents referenced indirectly, a reason to say, "Be careful," without explanation. Children accepted the warning without context. Context often comes later. December continued to market itself as harmless. Warm lights, familiar songs, recycled joy. So you see, nothing in the season changed to reflect what had happened. Seasons never do. In prison, he stopped marking years entirely. Counting felt unnecessary. Days stacked evenly, indistinguishable from one another. That sameness felt final. When new inmates arrived, they asked no questions. Reputation fades quickly in closed systems. He no longer felt the urge to be understood. Understanding had lost value. During medical checks, he answered briefly. Words became tools, not expressions. One winter, snow reached the prison yard again. He watched without reaction. Snow had stopped symbolizing anything. It was just weather now. Outside those walls, the surviving woman attended a holiday gathering reluctantly. Someone told a harmless joke about bad dates. She smiled without tension. That moment passed quietly. No internal alarms followed. She realized then how long it had been since fear led her decisions. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It accumulates slowly. Across the country, another podcast released a holiday episode. This story was mentioned briefly, without names, a cautionary footnote. Listeners felt unease without knowing why. Unease lingered longer than facts. The episode ended with silence instead of music. Silence carried more weight. December nights remained long and reflective. People filled them with meaning anyway. The case stayed closed. The pattern stayed broken. And the season kept its promises to everyone else. Eventually, even professionals stopped using the case as reference. New data replaced old lessons. Training manuals updated quietly. Patterns were absorbed without names attached. That anonymity felt intentional. Monsters grow louder when named too often. The surviving woman stopped measuring time in years since. Measurement implies wait. She allowed December to arrive without negotiation. Acceptance replaced vigilance. Holiday crowds no longer felt threatening. Noise blended into background movement. She trusted her instincts without letting them dominate. Balance felt like progress. In prison, he became another aging body in a system built for waiting. No one asked him about Christmas anymore. The season passed unnoticed. Medical staff spoke in numbers and charts. Identity dissolved into metrics. He listened without interruption. Interruption requires urgency. Once, during a routine check, a nurse wished him happy holidays. He nodded without response. Words felt unnecessary. Outside, cities dressed themselves in lights again. Beauty repeated without memory. People took photos under decorations they didn't question. Joy borrowed familiar shapes. Children learned songs older than any warning. Music doesn't carry footnotes. The surviving woman watched snow fall one evening. She didn't assign meaning. It melted quickly on warm pavement. Nothing lingered. That felt right. The story reached its quiet conclusion there. Not with justice, not with revelation, but with time doing what it always does. Reducing everything to background noise and letting December pass like any other month. What people never noticed was how close it all stayed to normal. Normal was the disguise that worked best. No alarms had sounded. No instincts were shared loudly enough. The town continued recommending cafes where first dates felt safe. Safety is often assumed, not tested. December lights reflected in windows like reassurance. Reassurance has a way of dulling attention. The case had not changed laws or customs. It simply slipped into history. History prefers distance. Distance removes responsibility. In prison, His name appeared less often on lists. Transfers and releases reshaped the population. He became background, indistinguishable from routine movement. Routine erased his edges. He no longer corrected guards who mispronounced his name. Names had lost ownership. When illness slowed him, no urgency followed. Systems respond only to thresholds. Outside, the surviving woman stopped thinking about patterns altogether. Life demanded other focus. Work deadlines replaced vigilance. Conversations replaced caution. She trusted that danger no longer defined her calendar. Christmas music played in stores again. She noticed melodies instead of lyrics. That small shift felt like freedom. In another city, a young couple argued quietly during a holiday party. Someone laughed nervously. Someone misunderstood it. Nothing happened that mattered. Because most moments end there. They dissolve without consequence. This story was never about inevitability. It was about proximity, about how close ordinary moments sit to irreversible ones, and how easily people confuse silence with safety. December ended quietly again. No promises were broken. Nothing was taken, and that was the ending no one notices. People assume danger announces itself clearly before it arrives. Most of the time, it blends into routine. Routine is trusted because it feels earned and familiar. Familiarity lowers defenses faster than fear ever could. December amplifies this effect more than any other month. People expect warmth and receive distraction instead. The case never became a lesson taught publicly. Lessons require attention, and attention fades quickly. What remained were fragments scattered across memories. Fragments rarely form warnings on their own. In prison, his days shortened in feeling, not in length. Time compressed into repetition without anticipation. He stopped reflecting on what he had done. Reflection requires conflict, and conflict was gone. The system around him continued efficiently. Efficiency does not ask moral questions. Outside, life continued rearranging itself naturally. New concerns replaced old anxieties. Without effort, the surviving woman no longer measured her reactions. She trusted her body to speak when needed. Trust returned slowly, without ceremony. It stayed because it was no longer questioned. She noticed how many people ignore subtle discomfort. Discomfort often feels impolite to acknowledge. Politeness has its own dangers. Silence often wears good manners. The town replaced old decorations with newer ones. Change disguised continuity. Nothing marked the exact place where memory once lingered. Absence leaves no outline. People walked those streets unaware of what once unfolded nearby. Unawareness felt natural, even necessary. In records, the case remained closed and complete. Completion does not equal understanding. The story lost its edges as years passed. Edgeless stories stopped demanding attention. December arrived again without incident. It always does. Lights turned on, songs played, and people believed in normalcy. Belief remains humanity's strongest habit. Nothing dramatic interrupted the season. That quiet was the final truth, because the most unsettling stories don't end loudly. They end by becoming ordinary again. Ordinary days returned faster than anyone expected. Normality repairs itself with impressive speed. People prefer stories with endings they can point to. This one offered none. There was no single moment where fear officially stopped. Fear simply lost relevance over time. December decorations kept improving each year. Brightness compensated for uncertainty. In prison, his health declined quietly without symbolism. Aging stripped meaning from memory. Doctors spoke in careful tones and efficient schedules. Compassion followed procedure, not history. He stopped correcting their assumptions long ago. Assumptions no longer threatened him. When winter came, it arrived without emotion. Cold became temperature, not metaphor. Outside, the surviving woman learned to enjoy silence again. Silence stopped feeling like warning. She noticed how peace feels boring when it finally arrives. Boredom became comforting. Holiday dinners grew slightly louder each year. Laughter returned without calculation. She allowed it to exist without analysis. That permission mattered most. Across the country, listeners replayed certain podcast moments. They searched for hidden meaning. Meaning doesn't hide where people expect it. It sits openly in patterns. Patterns remain invisible until repetition ends. By then, recognition comes too late. December repeated itself once more. No lessons were announced. The season promised warmth again. People believed it. Lights turned on across neighborhoods simultaneously. Synchronization created safety. Nothing interrupted that illusion. Illusions survive when unchallenged. This story settled into archives and instincts. It waited without urgency, because the quietest endings are the ones that stay with you longest. Nothing new ever surfaced after that. Silence confirmed that the pattern had ended. People mistook that silence for safety. Safety is often just a pause without context. December kept returning with familiar confidence. Familiarity convinced everyone nothing was wrong. The town stopped associating the season with anything unusual. Association fades faster than memory. In prison, he became medically unremarkable. Records listed conditions, not history. No one asked him to explain himself anymore. Explanations require listeners. He spent long hours staring at blank walls. Blankness suited him better than reflection. The system did not care about his inner life. Systems are designed to ignore interiors. Outside, the surviving woman stopped thinking of herself as surviving. Identity shed its qualifier naturally. She introduced herself without hesitation or footnotes. That freedom felt earned. Holidays no longer triggered preparation or anxiety. Preparation implies expectation of harm. She trusted that nothing waited for her anymore. That trust stayed quiet and strong. Elsewhere, people continued debating true crime morality. Distance makes judgment feel harmless. They searched for monsters and stories. Monsters rarely look like stories. The season ended without incident again. Repetition built confidence. Confidence replaced caution without discussion. Life continued doing what it always does best. It moved forward without commentary. This story did not return for a final warning. Warnings only matter before repetition. It ended by dissolving into routine. Routine swallowed everything else. And December passed, unnoticed, like it was supposed to. The strange thing was how little effort it took for the world to forget. Forgetting felt less like a choice and more like gravity. People remembered emotions longer than facts. Facts require maintenance. Emotions fade on their own. December kept returning with polished confidence. Each year looked identical to the last. Holiday advertisements promised safety through tradition. Tradition rarely questions itself. In prison, his routines narrowed further. Days lost distinguishing features entirely. Morning checks, meals, lights out. Structure replaced thought completely. He no longer replayed conversations in his head. Replays require emotional charge. What remained was emptiness without discomfort. Comfort does not always feel warm. Medical staff noted cognitive decline as expected. Decline felt like relief to him. Memory gaps formed naturally, without resistance. Forgetting worked from the inside out. Outside, the surviving woman noticed how rarely she thought about him now. Absence felt unfamiliar at first. She worried briefly that forgetting meant weakness. Then she understood it meant healing. Her Decembers filled with neutral rituals. Walking, cooking, quiet gatherings. No superstition guided her choices anymore. Fear had stopped negotiating her schedule. In another town, a young woman laughed nervously during a date. The moment passed without consequence. That mattered more than any cautionary tale. Most moments end safely. True crime discussions continued evolving online. Stories competed for attention aggressively. This one never trended again. It lacked spectacle. Spectacle sustains memory. Quiet erodes it. Mississippi winters shortened further. Snow became rare and brief. Climate shifted without asking permission. Change rarely announces intention. The prison scheduled holiday meals again. Turkey replaced routine protein. He ate slowly, methodically. Taste had become irrelevant. A guard wished him a peaceful season. Peace sounded abstract. He nodded anyway. Agreement costs nothing outside those walls. Lights reflected on wet streets. Reflections always distort reality slightly. People hurried past one another, carrying gifts. Gifts suggest optimism. Optimism survived untouched. That was unsettling. The surviving woman hosted another small dinner. Conversation flowed without effort. She noticed laughter came easily now. Ease had replaced vigilance. At one point, silence settled briefly. No one rushed to fill it. Silence felt safe. That was new. Years earlier, silence meant danger. Meaning had changed. That change mattered more than justice. In archives, the case remained untouched. Dust accumulated naturally. Archivists prefer closed stories. Open ones create work. This story stayed closed because nothing demanded reopening. Patterns did not repeat, that mattered. December arrived again, slower somehow. Time softened its edges. Lights blinked on without ceremony. Songs played without irony. Nothing waited beneath the surface this time. The story ended not with revelation, but with erosion. Erosion removed sharpness patiently. What remained was ordinary life. An ordinary life, for once, was enough. Ordinary life continued proving its strength through repetition. Repetition builds trust faster than hope ever could. Spring arrived without symbolism. No one looked for meaning in it anymore. The surviving woman stopped measuring time by years since. She measured it by mornings that felt light. She noticed how memory now arrived without physical tension. Remembering no longer demanded payment. Sometimes she wondered who she would have been without December attached to fear. The question stopped feeling urgent. Urgency had been a symptom, not a trait. Across the country, documentaries searched for new villains. Audiences preferred escalation. This story offered no escalation. It dissolved quietly. The man in prison aged faster than calendars predicted. Identity thins when no one mirrors it back. He stopped dreaming altogether. Sleep became mechanical. Doctors called it dissociation. He felt it as relief. Relief is not redemption. It is absence of friction. Letters stopped arriving. They had stopped long ago. Names lose weight when they aren't spoken. In another December, a child pressed their face to a window. Lights blurred into soft color. Nothing bad hid behind them. That mattered. Parents argued softly in kitchens. Soft arguments still meant safety. Safety does not announce itself loudly. The surviving woman walked past a cafe she used to avoid. She went in without noticing the decision. The coffee tasted unremarkable. That was perfect. She watched couples talk with distracted intimacy. No resentment followed. Comparison had finally loosened its grip. Somewhere, files were digitized and compressed. Data shrank to metadata. Metadata does not carry weight. The past remained intact but inactive. Inactivity changed its power. Silence stopped being interpreted as warning. Another winter passed with minimal snow. Streets stayed wet, not frozen. People adapted without reflection. Humans always do. In a quiet room, the man asked a nurse what month it was. The answer meant nothing to him. Meaning requires context. Context had dissolved. He stared at the wall where decorations used to hang. Absence left no outline. That was the final erasure. The story did not vanish. It lost relevance. Loss of relevance is gentler than closure. Outside, life continued without referencing him. That was the real ending. Years later, the town replaced its Christmas lights with newer models. The glow was colder, more efficient, less forgiving. People didn't remember why the change happened. They only remembered that it felt necessary. The house where it all began was sold twice. Each owner painted over the walls with increasing impatience. Paint hides stains, but not proportions. Rooms still felt wrong. Children grew up without knowing what they were spared from. Ignorance protected them better than warnings ever could. Fear taught nothing useful once the threat was gone. The surviving woman learned how to tell her story without trembling. Control returned through repetition, not silence. She chose when the past was allowed to speak. Sometimes she spoke at universities. Sometimes she spoke only to herself. Both audiences mattered equally. She stopped using his name entirely. Names give shape. He no longer deserved one. In the prison, Christmas arrived unnoticed. No decorations, no songs, no markers of time. Time flattened into routine. He stopped asking questions. Curiosity had been tied to hunger. Without hunger, nothing followed. Guards described him as cooperative. Cooperative meant empty. Empty men are easy to manage. On one particular December morning, snow finally came, its softness sound across the city. Softness can feel like forgiveness when mistaken. The surviving woman watched the snow fall from her window. Her pulse stayed steady. That was how she knew she was free. Elsewhere, the man failed to wake up. No announcement followed. No one hurried. Paperwork completed itself. Systems closed loops without ceremony. Ceremony is for the living. News traveled briefly, then disappeared beneath larger headlines. Attention moved on, it always does. That night, lights turned on across the city. Windows glowed without fear behind them. Nothing was watching anymore. The story ended not with justice, but with irrelevance was enough. But stories don't truly end when names disappear. They fade the way winter does, unevenly, leaving cold pockets behind. Some nights, the town still felt paused between breaths. Silence lingered longer than it should. The surviving woman moved to a place where December smelled different. Pine instead of metal, candles instead of wires. She decorated carefully, never rushing. Each ornament was chosen, not inherited. Choice mattered now. She learned that safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was the presence of control. Every Christmas Eve, she allowed herself one memory, just one. Memory loses its teeth when it's contained. She never told anyone about the dream that returned each year. In it, the lights went out all at once. Darkness didn't scare her anymore. She woke before fear could finish forming. That was new. Across the country, the town slept through another winter. Snow erased footsteps that no one was looking for. Old houses settled deeper into their foundations. They stopped waiting. Nothing else happened. And that was the point. Evil doesn't always leave scars on places. Sometimes it just passes through. The season kept returning, indifferent and rehearsed. Songs played. Gifts were exchanged. People mistook tradition for innocence. Somewhere, a listener reached the end of this story. They expected something louder, but horror rarely ends with a scream. It ends with quiet rooms, steady breathing, and the knowledge that it's over. Time didn't heal the town. It covered it like snow over broken glass. Every December, the decorations returned first, then the memories followed quietly. People preferred the lights to the truth. Lights were easier to fix. They said his name less each year. Silence felt like progress. The house where it happened was sold, repainted, renamed by real estate listings. Fresh paint doesn't erase weight. It just hides it from visitors. New tenants felt uneasy without knowing why. Unease doesn't need explanations. At night, the heating system clicked, like distant footsteps. No one called the police for that. The surviving woman stopped counting years. Numbers had lost authority over her life. She learned to recognize fear without obeying it. That skill saved her more than luck ever did. Sometimes she told herself the story differently. In her version, she left earlier. That version helped her sleep. Christmas music still made her pause in crowded stores. Sound carries memory better than images. She never stayed long enough to hear the second verse. Far away, behind concrete and schedules, he waited. Prison stripped him of mirrors, but not reflection. He replayed moments the way others replay songs. Always starting before the mistake. They blamed tone alcohol. Timing. Neville himself. Psychologists wrote notes while he smiled politely. He liked being studied. Attention felt familiar. Every December, he asked the same question. Is it snowing? The answer didn't matter. The ritual did. Christmas, to him, was never about forgiveness. It was about confirmation. The town never held a memorial. Memorials require agreement on what was lost. People argued silently about guilt, about warning signs, about who should have noticed first. Silence won. Silence usually does. Christmas markets returned louder than before. Children laughed where police once stood. Parents filmed smiles carefully, cutting out corners of the street that felt wrong. Memory survives best in places nobody records. The surviving woman moved cities, but not seasons. December followed her like a shadow that knew her name. She learned which streets to avoid when lights came on too early. Sometimes she woke up convinced she smelled his apartment. Fear doesn't vanish. It changes costumes, she spoke once at a small conference. No cameras, no applause, just folding chairs and people who needed proof that survival was real. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her more than anyone else. She never said his name. Names give shape. In prison, December arrived quietly. No decorations, no music. He marked days by meals and medication schedules. Routine replaced anticipation. That felt like punishment. He told a chaplain he missed the season. The chaplain misunderstood and offered prayer. He smiled politely. Politeness had always protected him. At night, he dreamed of laughter. Not screams, not guilt. Laughter. The prison didn't decorate for Christmas, but the television did it anyway. Holiday ads slipped between news reports. Smiling families, selling warmth to people who could no longer touch it. He watched without blinking, memorizing faces that looked unreal, like actors hired to perform happiness for the guilty and the forgotten. He told the psychiatrist that December made him reflective. What he meant was, December made him honest with himself. In honesty, he admitted that love had always felt like a test he was failing in public. Christmas only amplified the audience. He spoke about respect again, about tone, about laughter that felt sharp instead of kind. The psychiatrist wrote notes and did not argue. Some ideas are not meant to be corrected, only documented. Across the state, the surviving woman learned how to survive holidays. She worked longer hours in December and kept her apartment dim. Lights felt invasive now, like they were watching her instead of guiding her. She stopped explaining herself to people who said, "But it's Christmas, you should be happy." Happiness, she learned, was not seasonal. Fear, however, followed calendars faithfully. Sometimes she imagined confronting him, not to accuse, but to understand. Understanding felt safer than mystery. She never did. Distance was her version of control. The town eventually stopped whispering. New scandals arrived, louder and easier to digest. What happened became a story people summarized incorrectly at parties. Stories shrink when repeated by people who weren't there. Only December remembered everything accurately. In prison, he asked for a calendar. He circled nothing, but he liked knowing where Christmas lived. On the week of it, he slept less. The walls felt thinner. He told another inmate that Christmas was when people showed who they really were. The inmate laughed and said it was just a day. That laughter stayed with him longer than the conversation. Years passed. Evidence aged. Faces blurred, but the pattern never did. On one December morning, a guard asked him if he wanted to attend a small service. He declined politely. Politeness. Again, he preferred his cell. Preferred the quiet where memory spoke without interruption. He thought about the first woman and convinced himself it had been an accident for the 1000th time. Repetition had turned the lie into furniture. He thought about the second and framed it as necessity. Necessity always sounds reasonable in retrospect. The third haunted him differently. She survived. Survival disrupted the story, he told himself. Outside, Christmas music played in stores that didn't know his name. Inside, he finally understood something too late to matter. Not everyone who laughs is mocking. Not every boundary is disrespect. But understanding without consequence is just another form of comfort. On Christmas Eve, the lights outside the prison flickered because of a power issue. For a moment, the darkness returned. He smiled in it. Darkness never asked him to change. The surviving woman spent that night awake, listening to the city breathe. She didn't celebrate, but she didn't either. Survival had taught her something simple and brutal. Evil doesn't end when it's caught. It ends when it is remembered accurately. Somewhere between midnight and morning, Christmas arrived quietly, without promises. And for the first time in years, nothing was taken. Years later, someone would retell this story, and say it was obvious in hindsight. Hindsight always pretends it was braver than it really was. They would say the signs were everywhere, that evil announces itself clearly if you know where to look. That belief comforts people who want the world to be readable. In reality, he looked ordinary, because ordinary is where monsters hide best. Nothing about him demanded attention until attention was too late. The surviving woman never corrected those versions of the story. Correcting people rarely changes what they need to believe. Instead, she learned to listen to silence again. Not the dangerous kind, but the kind that lets your body relax without explanation. Every December, she lights one candle and lets it burn until it goes out on its own. No wishes, no prayers. Just presence. Some nights, she still dreams of apartments and laughter that stops too suddenly. Waking up no longer feels like failure. In prison, his hair grayed and his posture softened. Time aged him physically, but preserved his inner narrative perfectly. He told the parole board once that he had reflected deeply. Reflection is easy when nothing reflects back. They denied him without drama. Paperwork doesn't need anger to be final. The town replaced old lights with newer, brighter ones. Technology improved, memory faded, routine returned. Children grew up unaware of what once happened on streets. They walked daily. That is how life continues without permission. But stories like this survive differently. They don't live in archives or court documents. They live in pauses, in instincts, in moments when someone chooses to leave early without knowing why. This story was never about Christmas. Not really. Christmas was just the mirror. It showed what people expect, what they promise, and what they ignore because it's inconvenient. Somewhere, someone listening to this right now feels a quiet recognition. Not fear, but clarity. That clarity is the point, because evil doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like wounded pride waiting for justification. And survival doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like living anyway. Christmas will come again, it always does. The question is not what it promises. The question is what you refuse to give. Long after the case files were archived, his words stayed with the detectives. Not the confessions, but the calm certainty in his voice. He never spoke like someone who felt caught. He spoke like someone who felt misunderstood. One officer admitted years later that this scared him more than the crimes. Violence ends, but conviction lingers. The surviving woman stopped following true crime stories entirely. She didn't need reminders disguised as education. When friends asked why, she smiled and said she preferred fiction. Fiction had rules and endings. Real life never promises either. She learned to trust the moment when her body said no. That instinct saved her once, and she never questioned it again. People call it intuition. She calls it memory, speaking quietly. Every relationship after that was built slowly, deliberately, without shortcuts. Urgency became a warning sign. Love that demands speed often hides something else underneath. In prison, Christmas passed without witnesses. No audience. No reactions, no one to impress. That absence frustrated him more than punishment ever could. He wrote letters that were never sent, pages filled with explanations nobody asked for. He still believed understanding would change everything. It never did. The town's name stopped appearing in searches. News cycles moved on to fresher horrors. People like to believe danger is rare. Rarity makes it feel manageable. But stories like this repeat because emotions repeat. Shame, rejection, entitlement, resentment, different faces. Same pattern. Someone listening right now might feel uncomfortable. Not because of what he did, but because of what feels familiar. The discomfort is not accusation. It's awareness. This story doesn't ask you to fear strangers. It asks you to notice yourself. Notice laughter that feels forced. Notice silence that feels heavy. Notice when kindness turns conditional, because monsters don't arrive announcing themselves. They arrive asking to be understood, and survival often begins with refusing to explain yourself to someone who already decided who you are. The lights will turn on again next December. They always do. What matters is what you see when they do. There are stories people listen to for fear, and stories they listen to for permission. This one quietly gives permission to leave. Leave rooms that feel wrong. Leave conversations that twist your stomach. No explanation is ever owed to discomfort. The surviving woman learned that her life didn't need to be meaningful to anyone else. Survival itself was meaning enough. She stopped measuring days by progress and started measuring them by peace. Some mornings were heavy without reason. She accepted them anyway. In prison, he aged into a his name meant nothing to new guards. That anonymity wounded him more than judgment ever had. He once asked if anyone still talked about him outside. The question was ignored. Being forgotten felt like erasure, not release. That is the part nobody warns you about. Monsters don't fear death. They fear silence without witnesses. The town never changed its routines again. Grocery stores played the same music every December. People complained about crowds, prices, weather. Life insisted on normalcy. And that normalcy was not denial. It was survival, too. Someone listening may feel the urge to look back at moments they brushed off. Moments where laughter felt sharp. Moments where politeness hid pressure. This story doesn't say those moments always mean danger. It says they deserve attention. Fear is not weakness when it protects you. Christmas will always promise warmth. Lights will always suggest safety. But safety is not decoration. It is awareness, practiced quietly. If you remember one thing from this story, let it be these. You are allowed to leave before the story becomes something else. And sometimes, leaving is how the story ends without blood. Some stories don't want applause at the end. They want a pause. A moment where you sit still and notice your breathing. The surviving woman learned to love ordinary evenings again. Nothing planned, nothing expected, nothing owed. She stopped proving she was okay. She simply was. The man became a detail in reports. Few people read fully. Ink on paper, not a presence. That was the only ending he never imagined. The town prepares for another Christmas without knowing why it feels lighter. Some weight leaves places quietly. Nobody thinks silence when it does its job. Lights turn on. Snow falls. Music repeats the same promises. This time, those promises don't control the story. If you are still here, listening, then the story trusted you. Trusted you to understand. Without spectacle, not everything dangerous is loud. Not everything safe is bright. Awareness doesn't ruin joy. It protects it. And when this story finally lets go, it does so gently. Nothing else happens. Time does something strange with stories like this. It removes faces, dates, details, but it leaves a feeling that can't be directly named. This feeling emerges when you're standing in a room and suddenly realize you want to leave without explaining why. The surviving woman learned to respect that feeling without arguing with it. She stopped asking herself to be reasonable when instinct was already speaking. Reason explains things after. Instinct exists before explanation. She built a life where nothing needed to be proven. No dramatic happiness. No visible redemption. Just days that felt honest. Honesty, she discovered, was quieter than she expected. Sometimes she wondered who she would have been if that night had gone differently. That question no longer hurt. Speculation loses power when reality survives. In the system that held him, his story was reduced to timelines and evidence lists. That reduction felt appropriate. He wanted narrative. He got documentation. There is a difference between being remembered and being recorded. He was only the latter. Outside, seasons kept rotating without ceremony. Winter followed autumn, like it always had. Christmas returned again, rehearsed and polished, asking nothing about the past. People accepted that invitation easily. Most people do. This story does not ask you to distrust everyone. That would be another kind of prison. It asks you to trust the moment when something feels wrong, even if it looks right. Because danger often borrows the language of familiarity. And survival often looks like small choices nobody applauds. If you've listened this far, the story has already done its work. Not by frightening you, but by sharpening something quiet inside. That quiet stays long after the voice ends. The lights go out. The room returns to normal. And somewhere between silence and breath, the story lets you go.